My name is Jessica Savoy, and I am honored to take the floor today as the National Youth Representative for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. I am an ISPA woman who has traveled here from unceded Coast Salish territories to talk to you today about what Indigenous youth are facing in Canada. I would first like to acknowledge that we are on the homelands of the Lenape-Hoking who are displaced by European settler colonization over 400 years ago. Our organization is assisting Indigenous youth to become more familiar with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I would like to first off acknowledge Article 3, the right to self-determination, and Article 4, the right to autonomy, as they uphold the minimum standard of rights to advance Indigenous peoples across the nations. One of the biggest obstacles to implementing the UN Declaration is determining what the terms in the Declaration actually mean. Terms like self-determination, restitution, and free, prior, and informed consent. In Canada, the UN Declaration is not legally binding. Legislation implementing the UN Declaration is subject to potential repeal by subsequent governments. We need to work hard with great care in the implementation process. UNDRIP does not create new rights, but rather elaborate on the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples. The Declaration represents the minimum content of the rights of Indigenous peoples, and yet a majority of Indigenous peoples in Canada are left out of any kind of free, prior, and informed consent. I would like to note that over 80% of Indigenous peoples who live in Canada reside off reserve, and yet the government chooses to engage through a distinctions-based approach, leaving out a majority of Indigenous youth through consultation processes. Leadership development is a starting point where Indigenous youth leaders can develop the skills needed to succeed in intense political environments. Decolonization means changing how Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples view each other and themselves. The term decolonization involves recognition of Indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and perspectives, and incorporation of Indigenous ways of knowing and doing. Indigenous youth have an important role to play in decolonizing institutions and creating space that honor Indigenous peoples. I call on the UN, the Permanent Forum, and all levels of government to honor and uphold Indigenous peoples, especially those who are most vulnerable, because oftentimes Indigenous peoples are moving to urban environments to seek economic opportunity and are falling through the cracks. Thank you very much. I hold my hands up to each of you for being here today.